Good evening, everybody, and thank you for attending this meeting. One or two housekeeping items before we commence the meeting fully. Just let people know there is no provision for anyone other than the invited members and officers to speak at this meeting. So I request that everyone remains muted if they are not requested to speak. If you wish to speak, may I remind members to type hand in the chat function. And the other thing is, I am aware that there has been some emails circulated attempting to influence the members. I note that some of these emails have implied that the borough is attempting to close the pool permanently. This is not the case, and may I remind members that we are here this evening to determine the decision made by the Cabinet and nothing more. Right, we will go to item 1 straight away. Apologies for absence. Emma, I haven't got any, and I think I see everyone's face.
And so, none received, Chair.
Item 2 is declaration of interests. Has anyone got any declarations of interest? Bearing in mind the emails you've received earlier this week, or sorry, last week. I take it.
No indication. Sorry. No indication, Chair.
Yeah, I take it from the silence with no indications. So we go to item 3, the additional contract variation 5 filed goes YMCA to facilitate the recovery of leisure centre provision, and it's the call-in. So may I ask Lorraine, as she has submitted the call-in, to introduce it and take it from there.
Thank you, Councillor Ibbotson. The Cabinet decision on the 25th of November was a travesty. A decision that is based on flawed data, predetermined outcomes, and a decision that adversely affects the health and well-being of the residents. A decision that leaves the vast majority of Wyre residents without an easily accessible pool. And a decision that leaves many schools without the use of a pool. A decision that will result in many school children being stopped from learning to swim. Councillors calling this in believe the decision-making process did not properly consider all available options. The recommended options were based on unsound information, and therefore the decision itself is unsound. The decision by Cabinet was based on an incorrect assumption that all residents will be able to access facilities within a reasonable travel distance. There is also uncertainty surrounding whether the projected costs for 2021 were considered in the decision-making process. And finally, there were concerns over the reliability of the figures presented for 2021-22, which are based on no more than a worst case scenario guess. Supplementary briefing. This call-in request was completed based on the information available from the executive decision on the 25th of the 11th, 2020. A briefing note has since been issued at 7 p.m. last night, less than 24 hours before tonight's meeting. And data requested over a week ago was provided in an email at 2 p.m. today. The production of this surprise briefing note to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, less than 24 hours before the committee was due to meet, now contains information that wasn't included in the original Cabinet report. For example, the intention to refer Wyre residents to Blackpool Council pools as a solution to Wyre's Council's decision not to open our own swimming pools. The mere existence of this briefing confirms that there was a missing information and misleading data in the original report. Its creation confirms the report to Cabinet needs reworking and the decision reconsidered. This is backed up by further data that has been received today. Issues. The councillors calling in this decision would like the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to determine whether options other than those within the Cabinet report should have been formally considered and documented, e.g. the option to reopen Fleetwood Pool instead of or as well as Garstang. Determine whether the figures or presented as well as in the Cabinet report were sound enough to make the decision. Determine what is a reasonable travel distance and whether or not the population of Wyre is best served by this decision in terms of pool provision. Determine whether or not the swimming requirements of the national curriculum are being met, and determine whether the projected costs for 2021-22 were considered or should have been considered given the unreliability of the data presented. The committee must also determine how Wyre intend to meet those costs. Options. At the Cabinet, the portfolio holder, Councillor Bowen, stated, "We did go through all the options. We spent hours and hours." So it begs the question, if you spent hours and hours going through the options, where were all the options in the report? Where was the option of opening Fleetwood Pool rather than Garstang Pool? Where was the option of opening 2 of the 3 pools? Did you conveniently forget to document those other options? The report is missing vital information. Okay, COVID grant funding is in place, and you seemingly found a way of using 340,000 of that to reopen 2 of the centres, but not all 4, which would have cost an extra 28,000. But you can find 30,000 for consultants. We accept the long-term future of the centres does need looking into. Indeed, we are pressing for a task group to consider the problems faced and determine a way forward to keeping all centres open and financially sound. If consultants are required to feed into the internal council process, then so be it. But right now, this should be purely about getting the pools and the centres open. So where was the option to use the 30,000 to reopen Fleetwood and Poulton pools and gyms? And where was the option to open up the money from the COVID grant with money from the general balances? It would have cost 28,000, that's all. Usage and membership figures. As I said earlier, the recommended options and therefore the decision itself was based on unsound information, proven by today's further data. The Cabinet was alerted to the unsound data by the Labour group, yet proceeded to make an unsound decision. I find this deeply worrying. Whilst Garstang was broken down into gym and pool, and Thornton being only gym, there was no breakdown of Fleetwood and Poulton in terms of either the usage or the membership. This resulted in Fleetwood and Poulton both receiving unfair comparisons. The usage figures took no account of the periods of closure, e.g. the different opening dates after the first COVID wave, and ad hoc closure such as a faulty boiler. So you simply cannot compare Thornton or Garstang leisure centres usage, which have no pool, with data from Fleetwood, which does have a pool, and in any case, it's been shut since March. And in terms of membership, you cannot compare Thornton or Garstang with Fleetwood. That's what Councillor Webster did at the Cabinet meeting. She said, and I quote, "Garstang Leisure Centre retained over 88% of its paying members at the end of September, compared to September the previous year, whereas Fleetwood only retained 47% for the same period. It's no surprise we are where we are with lazy analysis like that. Councillor Webster was comparing gym only with a centre that has a gym plus a pool. The least she should have done was add the Garstang pool figures to the gym figures to give a retained membership of 58%, not 88% as she claimed. Even then though, without knowing pool-only membership figures at Fleetwood, it's really difficult to draw a reliable comparison, and certainly you should not make the comparison Councillor Webster made. Thankfully, we now have the data, and the overview and scrutiny need to look at this as part of their deliberations. It is clear that when this data is normalised or levelled, that the basis of the original Cabinet decision was unsound. It shows that the usage of each of the gyms was almost the same percentage term as previous years. The Cabinet's defence of their decision, it really doesn't help when a decision maker has such a poor grasp of data. Councillor Bowen claimed at the Cabinet meeting, "Councillor Fail, your figures didn't add up." It would be unfair to allow Councillor Bowen to get away with this. Why? Because the figures Councillor Fail quoted were the very same figures Councillor Bowen presented in her own report. So if the figures don't add up, they are her own figures and not Councillor Fail's. And then there was Councillor Michael Vincent's bizarrely claiming, "We are being asked to open the swimming pools, all of the swimming pools, Fleetwood being huge and underused currently and used even less." Underused currently, used even less. How can you actually use it less than not at all? It's been shut since March. These people are making decisions on behalf of the public, for heaven's sake. Travel distance, as if the dubious data wasn't enough. Later in the report, we are told all residents will be able to access facilities within a reasonable travel distance. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee really need to scrutinise that statement and actually determine what percentage of the population could reasonably be served by the various options. According to the report to Cabinet, we are all within a reasonable travel distance of Garstang Pool. The report needs an injection of realism. There won't be many, if any, people from Fleetwood, Thornton, Cleveleys or Polton making the 30 to 45-minute drive to Garstang. And as for travelling by bus, that is delusional and completely unrealistic. Schools and swimming club data. A glaring admission from the report is that the data showing each school and club's willingness to return and their ability to return to swimming. Decisions are being made, yet where is the data? It was as if the decision was made subjectively and rather than objectively. Councillor Henderson stated, "The message that I got back from schools was quite simple. If you reopen tomorrow, we're not sending our children until March at the very earliest." How that fits in with Councillor Webster's claims that local schools have also been lobbying for the pool to reopen, I don't know. Or indeed Councillor Bowen's statement that the schools have been contacted and they're quite keen to start swimming again when it's safe and when the government guidelines tell them to. I've got news for you, Councillor Bowen. Government guidelines already allow swimming. We are being told today by the YMCA that, with the exception of one or two, most indicated a willingness to return. So Overview and Scrutiny need to look at this. As well as the issues specifically mentioned here, I would like to ask that the committee also consider national curriculum requirements and the projected costs from 21-22. To conclude, I ask that Overview